are joining our 10th edition of the New.Now.Next media conference hosted by the Asia chapter of the Asian American Journalists Association. I'm Wan Ha, the Asia chapter president and a Bloomberg reporter here in Hong Kong. We are on our third day of fantastic programming here at N3Con. Now, you may be joining us from your living room, bedroom, or home office. Know that by being here, you are part of a unique, diverse, and incredible community of journalists and media professionals. We are here to support each other, we're here to learn from one another, and we're here to foster great journalism. Now, 2020 has been a challenging year. For journalists, it means needing to adapt and innovate to tell crucial stories from the new Frontlines, our theme for this year. And delivering, essential news to the public is challenging in normal times. And that was, of course, that's been made much more difficult in a landscape where the story is quickly evolving, where disinformation and misinformation are rife, and where press freedom is under attack. We've got ABS-CBN, the Philippines' largest broadcaster, went dark yesterday and laid off more than 4,000 staff. We've got the outlet's head of news here to speak with us about that in a little bit. And here in Hong Kong, there are concerns about the national security law as another journalist's visa is denied. Here with me are some top news leaders to talk about how the new Frontlines are reshaping the media landscape in Asia. Please help me welcome Ging Reyes. She's head of integrated news at ABS-CBN. Hi, Ging. And we've got Adrian Carter.
Colleagues.
Hi there. We've got Adrian Carter, Asia editor at the New York Times.
Hey, everyone.
And Ronson Chan, he's senior reporter at the Stand News in Hong Kong.
Hello,
Cedric
everyone.
Alviani, he's the East Asia Bureau Director at Reporters Without Borders.
Hello, everyone.
And we probably in a little bit will have Pian Balji. He's a veteran journalist who was formerly a chief editor at Today in Singapore. He'll be joining us probably in a few minutes. Cedric, I wonder if we can start with you to give us a broad picture of the trend in declining press freedom. In the latest Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index, the Asia Pacific region saw the greatest rise in press freedom violations globally.
Well, we're entering a critical decade for freedom of the press. You can see behind me the World Press Freedom Map edited by Reporters Without Borders every year. Most countries on the map are actually red color or black color, which symbolize very difficult situations in terms of press freedom. There is indeed a consistent decline of press freedom in the world. You can see that there's very few countries where press freedom is properly respected, the countries that are marked in a white color on the map. You're looking for them. Most of them are on the north of Europe. And even in the major liberal democracies, there are major problems on press freedom. There are attacks from politicians. So this is a quite worrying situation. Half of the world lives under a regime that is directly opposed to freedom of the press. So now China has clearly become, the Chinese regime has clearly become the #1 enemy of press freedom, not only because of all the moves to suppress freedoms in China, but because the Chinese regime is very actively promoting an authoritarian model of media control all around the world, and especially through the Belt and Road Initiative project. Democracies for a long time have been lenient and have considered that business that business was the most important, but fortunately they are starting to react. COVID-19 has shown the importance of a free press, and as a matter of fact, if no one can blame China for the whole pandemic, it is obvious that the disease probably would never have left China if the media had been allowed to do their work and to properly inform the population at the start of the pandemic. So what are the challenges? Hong Kong is a very important challenge. We need to support Hong Kong because it represents the most, the highest level of freedom the Chinese people could hope for. and it's currently being dramatically reduced. And we must also encourage democracies so that they become better countermodels. Taiwan, South Korea, Japan must have a stronger lead, must have better media environment, better practices. And last, there are two major challenges for democracies on which Reporters Without Borders is working, which are to get back in control of the cyberspace, which currently is being controlled by the platforms and being polluted by disinformation due to the action of authoritarian powers. And an even bigger challenge, which is restore public trust in journalism, which means somehow find a way to allow the public to know that the media that respect the basic journalism principles are more trustable than other media. So these are major challenges for the decade to come. But I must say that we have to fight against this model of authoritarian media control because it's not sure that the coming decades, the coming generations would know what is independent journalism.
Yeah, I think, and that's, thank you, Cedric, for that. I think that actually segues really nicely to, unfortunately, an unfortunate event. Ging, there in the Philippines, when we talk about authoritarian, control of the media, you just yesterday had a very, very difficult job to do. You laid off 4,000, of the staff at ABS-CBN, including many, many journalists. And, this is the country's biggest broadcaster. And all of your broadcasts went dark yesterday.
It has been a very painful week for our people. In fact, it has been a very trying month for us because, as you know, we've informed hundreds of our employees and many of them journalists that the company would have to let go of them by the end of the month. And so this has, we have seen this in the last few days, very challenging times for us. But as you know, we've been shut down since the 5th of May this year, when the National Telecommunications Commission issued a cease and desist order. And that meant that 23 radio and 52 TV stations and channels stopped broadcasting on free-to-air. And that alone sent a chilling effect on our journalists' press freedom rights. And then after several congressional hearings on June 30th, another shutdown order was issued, which cut off our links to our satellite subscribers, as well as our direct to digital terrestrial TV subscribers. So these acts doomed the company's business. As of now, we are bleeding cash on a daily basis, and that is the reason these layoffs are happening. And of course, the public is the biggest loser as well, because our broadcast stations now have no links to the broader audience of ABS-CBN, people who live in remote parts of the country. And there are also millions of them, about 3 million, who only receive our TV and radio signals. And these are those who live in the far-flung provinces of the Philippines. And unfortunately, they have no internet access all the time. Our reach has been vastly diminished because we are now just streaming our content on social media, as well as on our own digital portals. And as you said, Juan, yesterday, 21 regional TV stations went dark. That meant that because they laid off people, our 12 local TV patrol or local newscasts, news programs that are delivered in the dialect and in the languages in those provinces, stopped streaming altogether. We have to let go of our regional journalists and crew. And, this is very sad because people in those communities lost their access to crucial information in this time of pandemic. And especially when we are expecting, um, you know, uh, calamities and important issues that our news teams cover day in and day out. And not
Yeah.
only that, I would like to add that our public service efforts would also be affected because whenever something happens, whenever disaster hits any part of the country, it's our regional stations and our regional journalists and staff who are first on the scene to provide help, to provide relief. Their activities are also anchored on health, on environmental protection, livelihood,
Yeah.
etc. So
Yeah.
it's a big loss to
It-
both ABS-CBN and the public that we serve, especially in those far-flung areas.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important for us to underscore is that we're cutting off access to news to people who may not otherwise have access, which is so critical at this time
Mhm.
when you're in the middle of a pandemic. Now, I want to give the context, Ging, a little bit, which is the context for this is that Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has leveled death threats against some reporters and has called for the assassinations of journalists. Maria Ressa, the executive editor of news website Rappler,
Mhm.
they've been very critical of Duterte's government. She's been found guilty of cyber libel. She actually spoke to us yesterday about the personal attacks she and her journalists have had to
Mhm.
face. What has that done, that climate? And of course, your news, now going dark. What has that done for journalism in the Philippines? How do you continue to work in this climate?
Well, it is very unfortunate because I remember that when I entered this profession, it was in 1986, right after our People Power Revolution, when our freedoms were just restored. People were hungry for news, for truth, because during martial law, almost all media in the Philippines at that time were controlled or state run. However, we are seeing the opposite these days. I think the rise of populist leaders and the social media phenomenon have become a lethal combination. And it's just, there is this chilling effect. Even among our own journalists, we feel it. There is worry, there is concern, there is apprehension that a story that one is pursuing might cause more trouble for the company, for instance. And if the biggest network of the Philippines is shut down, what kind of message does it send to other smaller media organizations, to other, community based media, local media too? So it is, I would say the atmosphere is far from ideal. It is not the media environment that I have been used to, one.
Yeah. And what about, what happens next? Is there, you've lost a second round, ABS-CBN, I should say, the media company has lost a second round of appeals
Mhm.
to get its license renewal. Um, Journalists, I imagine, are probably looking for work. What happens now? Is there another round of appeal in the process, or?
That is, we are not very optimistic about another round of appeal. We are probably just going to wait it out, try to survive. We are trying to find other means of serving the public. If anything, this is a way for us to look at other opportunities in the digital front or in partnerships with other companies and other organizations, not just within the country, but in the region, within the region. But as of now, that's what we are after. We want to make sure that our people are still in fighting form, so to speak. It is very difficult to be letting go of staff at such, at such, in this manner, and at the same time trying to find a way to survive and thrive in this kind of environment. So digital pivot, transformation, partnerships and alliances, that's where we are looking at the moment.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that, Ging. We're going to come back to you on a couple of other things, but let's right now turn for a bit to Hong Kong, where the new national security law is being criticized for quashing political dissent, free speech, and press freedom. Media tycoon Jimmy Lai was arrested a few weeks ago, and the news office of Apple Daily, which he founded, was raided. The Hong Kong Free Press said that one of their editors could not receive or has been denied a visa as well without explanation. We're going to play a quick video for you. We're not going to play it in its entirety, but just to give you a sense of what's happening here in Hong Kong before we get back to Adrian.
What's going on in Hong Kong since last year? The protests started in June. Protests were really reaching a peak in September with the extradition bill.
I didn't expect Hong Kong to be having such a big protest in 2019 with hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million people showing up to the streets.
During lessons, our teacher will encourage us to explore more about these issues, like why could it impact Hong Kong as a financial hub? How does this bill affect Hong Kong's freedom of speech?
This place used to be independent of China. You had this rambunctious press, you had open politics, but now you have people whispering over their shoulder, you have people deleting their WeChat accounts, you have people scrubbing their social media.
People of Hong Kong, they should be able to continue to enjoy the freedom of speech, freedom of press, of publications, protests, assembly, and so on and so on.
They've made Hong Kong into another city of China where there's certain things you can't do, where the press is restricted. So that's not going to change, I'm afraid. So is it the death of Hong Kong? It's the death of Hong Kong that I knew.
The police raid on Apple Daily headquarters was quite chilling for a lot of journalists. Certainly there is a degree of fear.
Mike, I think we can end it there. Thank you. Adrian, a couple of really, interesting points in there. Obviously, the video talked about, China's role now in the hand of China and the Communist Party in Hong Kong, especially with the national security law. How do you think that's playing out? How are we covering that, and what are the concerns around that with the national security law?
Yeah, I mean, from the day the national security law was enacted, it was very clear that Beijing wanted to control dissent and speech. You had a protester arrested for holding an independence flag. They've stopped students from singing the protest anthem in schools. You've had them reviewing books in the library by pro-democracy leaders. And as you noted, the raid on the Apple Daily for the press really was that big moment for us, and the arrest of Jimmy Lai. Suddenly you had journalists covering themselves. And I think ultimately for us in the media, one of the major concerns is, does Hong Kong ultimately become like a mainland city in terms of the press restrictions that you face, the accreditation, getting followed by police? Is that ultimately what Hong Kong looks like? We are not there. We don't know what the red line is going to be for the media at this point. We won't know until we see it, but we are taking precautions like we do in the mainland. We want to make sure we're protecting our sources. We want to make sure that, when we're communicating on sensitive topics, we're communicating properly. For us, the New York Times, our biggest issue has been visas. As you mentioned, another person had their visa denied. We had a reporter who had his visa denied a couple of months ago. It's a month and a half ago now at this point. And we've had a number of journalists who've had their visa renewals, which normally take Hong Kong about a day. It's incredibly efficient here to get your visa renewed. It has taken them months, and they've been unable to work. And for us, from an operational perspective, that has made it incredibly difficult. As a media operation, we're always going to be in Hong Kong. We're always going to be here to cover the news, to cover what's happening. But we have a huge digital hub here. We have 50 editors and reporters based in Hong Kong who do everything from running our social media accounts to running our website to running coverage for the region. And with the inability to work in Hong Kong, it made it incredibly difficult. So about a month and a half ago, we made the decision to relocate about a third of our operations in Hong Kong to Seoul. We're keeping all of our reporters, just as we do in other challenging environments like Russia or the mainland or Egypt. And we always want reporters on the ground, but we had to make the decision to relocate a large chunk of our editing hub in order to continue to be able to operate. We were concerned about, just from an operational perspective, whether we'd be able to keep working when several people, reporters and editors, don't have visas.
Yeah, I think it's that uncertainty that's so difficult for those of us who still live and work in the city. Ronson, you're a senior reporter at The Stand. You've obviously been covering this as well. I wonder, for you, when the New York Times announced, for example, that it's moving its operations to Seoul, did that have any kind of impact? Did that create buzz within, the local community of journalists at all? And I guess as a further to that, how, what is your take on kind of what's happening overall? We need to unmute you.
Unmute.
Nope, now you're good. Now you're good. We can hear you now.
It's okay. Okay, I'm glad that many people, especially journalists from Europe, America, and Asia Pacific areas, are concerned with the freedom of press in Hong Kong. It seems that the situation is not optimistic, as the host has mentioned that before. The Apple Daily have been searched by 200 police constables, and we learned that yesterday that the Nikkei have been requested to hand out some important materials to Hong Kong police, even if it was some advertising materials only. For many means and scenes that it shows that the situation is not well. But if you're asking that, are we going to have self-censorship, or do we have any special special arrangement for the news for the news working? I don't think that instant news. No, I would like to say, because we are an independent news agency. We are still going to do our own journalistic work. But of course, that we are afraid that maybe some report may attract the police attention. So we will take more take a more careful manner to handle the news which are very sensitive. But you mean that do we have a self-censorship? I would say in Stand News, no. But unfortunately, we have many other news agencies in Hong Kong. For example, newspaper, TV channels, and most of them were controlled by the very by the merchants or the tycoons, who have many a business relationship with China. So they were more easy to control. But I would like to say that is, even the pressure from the journalists are high, but Hong Kong journalists are keen to safeguard and uphold the freedom of press. Of course, the situation is not easy. They may have to fight with even one word, even one article, or even one news scenes if the management are not allowed them to release or publish. But I would like to say that the journalists in Hong Kong are very give our effort to safeguard the freedom of press.
Yeah, there must be concerns about personal safety or safety of sources. How are you dealing with that in light of the national security law?
Well, we have to take a more serious security arrangement of that. For example, we have to take more attention to how to contact with them. Maybe we will have to erase the content if our purpose is finished. We have under the national security law, we understand that we are easy to be traced, and the police must put their eyes on our communications and our office. So we have to take care, take a more serious manner to protect our sources.
Yeah. And are you finding, and Adrian, you might, from your reporters, you might also have a view on this. I mean, are you finding that it's difficult or more difficult to find people who are willing to talk to you openly and honestly, and, give them give you their names in terms of getting views on Hong Kong? Has that become more difficult? I mean, is there a sense of people being afraid to speak out at this point?
Well, I answered it. Right. Yes, we found it is more difficult. For example, we in the beginning of July, just the law enacted and soon, we go to interview with some people going out for protests. They don't allow us to take the photo or the video on their face. They only allowed us to take the photos on their feet or the lower body. So and my journalist told me that the interviewee was said that they were afraid of the national security law, and they're afraid their identity will be found. So we will respect the situation, but it changed the method that we have doing our journalistic work.
That's interesting.
I would just add, I mean, I think that is sort of the biggest concern, is not self-censoring of the press itself, but of actually sources and people who might write for our opinion pages or people who might speak to us normally, and whether they're willing to speak to us anymore. I mean, you see this a lot on the mainland where people, just ordinary people, on a regular story, there's nothing to do, it's not sensitive, are worried about speaking to the foreign press and the foreign media or the media in general. And I think that is ultimately, creates a sort of an environment that makes it harder to report and makes it harder to get stories, and ultimately does create that chilling effect that it doesn't matter if you have self-censorship, if people themselves are censoring, if your sources are censoring themselves. I mean, we did a story, I don't know if any of you guys saw that pool party photo from Wuhan, where the virus started. And it was this giant pool party, this dance party. It was this photo that went viral, and we called the venue where the party was, and they directed us to the propaganda department of the city. And it was sort of like, it's just this interesting viral moment, and even that turns out to be sensitive, that they're directing you to government officials for a comment.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, that if we want to get some source from the sensitive departments, for example, police force or the judiciary, we are not easy to get the source from them. Especially they won't give any hints or any records, black and white records on the WhatsApp, on signals, or even other messages in their mobile phone. Maybe I heard it. Some people, our journalists, trying to have a face-to-face interview with them in a very secret places, for example. So yes, we know that it is not an easy moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of the broader region, I mean, when we let's bring in Singapore as well. I mean, what we're seeing in Singapore is that it also enacted a law last year called POFMA, the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act. It allows any of the country's ministers to declare that an article, contains falsehoods and order a correction. That order has been issued like 22 times already, and has been levied against Yahoo News as well as Channel News Asia. And I guess, in some ways, I mean, Singapore is a place where, there is a defamation law there. And Adrian, I mean, you and I have talked about it was International Herald, right, IHT, that actually got sued back in the 90s, right, over an article there by the Prime Minister's family. But my question is, I mean, it seems as if all of these restrictions are coming at a time when the internet, and definitely POFMA speaks to this, has become an important source of information. We've seen the rise of citizen journalists, but we're also seeing governments use the internet to repress and curb press freedom as well. And I'm wondering, here in Asia, what do you think are we seeing it used more by governments to attack press freedom?
Yeah, I mean, Singapore is an interesting case study, right? It's ranked 158th for press freedom, I think, just between Kazakhstan and Sudan. And, as you mentioned, even before the fake news law, there were huge, you could face huge pressures there. We had to pay about $115,000 for an article that said the prime minister did not achieve his position through merit, and we had to ultimately apologize to the ruling Lee family and pay damages. And that's really the fake news law there now is part of a broader trend in Asia, that you're really starting to see the government use the internet to police speech. I mean, you're seeing it here in Hong Kong too, right? Where you had several people who were arrested over what is presumed to be tweets. You've had Agnes Chow, a pro-democracy leader, stop being on Twitter and advising people how to protect themselves on the internet. I mean, we recently did a story in Cambodia on a monk. He was a longtime human rights activist who, in the matter of 4 days, had his reputation ruined. Basically, a smear campaign on Facebook accused him of having an affair with a mother and her three daughters. He was later accused by prosecutors of rape, and the women had all denied it when we spoke with them. And the Facebook page was connected to the government, and he ultimately had to flee the country. So, this is also a country that manages to use, and many countries do manage to use the internet for disinformation to get forth whatever they want to say. So it's this amazing, as we've discussed, this amazing place for freedom of expression. I know in Philippines has been a great source of where people get their news, and I know you guys have used, ABN have used Facebook to great success in terms of getting news out. And yet at the same time, it is also this force of vitriol and that the government itself is using. And I'd be interested actually from Regina to hear a little bit about, how they used Facebook kind of in their final months, because I thought that was particularly interesting to hear how you guys were able to kind of find an audience there. And how has that been?
Unmute.
I think she.
There we go.
Oh, it is actually double-edged, Adrian. While we've had some success with Facebook, after we went dark one day and our primetime newscast went back on stream, online rather, we were able to get 8 million views just for that newscast. And of course, that was probably because of the anticipation. But right now we are doing pretty well. Of course, not the same high number or engagement, but we are doing well in YouTube as well as on Facebook. However, Facebook is also being used by people in power to diminish our credibility, to criticize and to bash our anchors, our reporters, our journalists. And we've also had this, we're not new to being bashed, but the red tagging is another issue. An official recently, I think a few months ago, spread disinformation alleging that some of our journalists are communists or communist sympathizers, or that they had ties with communists, and it's totally untrue. So it is being used. Facebook is so toxic as well, and it has become the weapon of choice of some people in government. whenever they want to attack an institution, an opposition figure, or a critic. You just have to be ready to, I guess, deal with all of that, and at the same time, establish your own following for you to take advantage or at least benefit from the engagement or whatever good that Facebook brings in terms of monetization, in terms of the metrics that you're after, etc.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cedric, I wonder if you can kind of, talk us through in terms of what you're seeing in Southeast Asia of how, social media and the internet is being weaponized by governments.
Well, obviously, 10 years ago, we would have considered that the internet was bringing great benefits for journalists and for the citizens to impart free information. Now the authoritarian governments have stricken back, and it's more and more difficult for journalists to operate in the region. The internet has become a tool for surveillance, and actually now it becomes even more dangerous than it was before, because it's very easy for governments to monitor. The Chinese regime is actually partly responsible for this phenomenon, because they provide every assistance possible to authoritarian regimes for them to somehow adopt the same policies and the same practices. And indeed, we have seen in the Southeast Asia the adoption of anti-fake news law that seemed like they were copy-pasted from the Chinese regulation. This is a major concern for Reporters Without Borders.
And we're, of course, I mean, when we speak about the internet and governments calling out and attacking media on the internet, we only have to look to the U.S. unfortunately these days. Where the U.S. President Donald Trump obviously is the one who popularized the term fake news, and is often quick to show his disdain for the media. I'm wondering, Ging, for you there in the Philippines, how has that rhetoric, the anti-media rhetoric, how has that influenced the Philippines, for example? And you think what President Duterte's government and policies are able to do now, has that been influenced by kind of the U.S. and the president's view on media?
Well, I think he may not have been influenced by Mr. Trump, because as far as I remember, our own president, as soon as he won the elections, he was president-elect in May of 2016, and he started attacking media and discrediting journalists. That was way, months before Mr. Trump got elected in the States. And I do remember those overnight or late night press conferences of then President-elect Duterte in Davao, in which he would berate journalists covering him and discredit media. That was when he said that journalists may be assassinated if they were behaving like SOBs. I do remember that. And it was quite traumatic for us to hear that for the very first time, because it was a direct attack on our profession, and it was just unimaginable coming from someone who just won the elections. And so it provided us a sort of sneak preview of what was to come, and now here we are.
That's an interesting point there. That perhaps the slide would have happened. Cedric, is that you?
Yes, I would like to add something. Like, of course, like President Donald Trump didn't give dictators the idea on how to attack journalists, but somehow the consistent attitude of attacking the media, calling the media and journalists the enemy of the people, is somehow encouraging attacks on press freedom. When in the US, a crazy person goes to a media and shoots journalists, somehow all politicians who are trying to attack journalists this way are a little bit responsible.
Yes.
And actually, the problem, the current problem of press freedom does not come from strongmen and dictators. They are what they are. They're not going to change. The problem is that democracies are not an example that is strong enough, and it's very important that democracies would set a better example. We're talking about the US, but we're talking about Japan that could do much better. We're talking also about the behavior of democracies towards countries that don't respect freedom of the press. It's about time that we stop being lenient and that democracies enforce policies that would somehow oblige these regimes to improve their freedoms. It's a question of the very core values of democracy. And currently, it's already too late to somehow change China, but it's not too late to protect our democracies from being changed by China. So it's extremely important before even we can hope improve the situation in authoritarian countries, we have to strengthen freedom of the press in democracies, because if we don't do that, there is no way we can have an impact somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would just, Cedric, you're right. I think it's crucial for nations, for societies to strengthen institutions so that no matter who leads, we can preserve and we can make sure that freedom of the press thrives. Yes.
I want to bring up June Lee's comment to us. He's a college student in Seoul, and you know, he talks about the situation with press freedom in the U.S. You know, his question more is you know, do you think press freedom is sufficiently guaranteed in the U.S.? How can we improve the situation? And I guess a lot of us are obviously covering this election. You know, I think the question out there is how would a Biden presidency change things, not just in terms of policy for, you know, overall policy for the U.S., but also in terms of how they interact with the media and with the press, and if that change could also bring perhaps a different kind of influence to the region. Adrian, I wonder if you might have some thoughts on this.
Sure. I mean, I think certainly a Biden administration will be different than a Trump administration in terms of, you know, Trump has really built a platform on denigrating the media, on calling them fake news, on bashing them. You know, we are a constant target of Trump when he doesn't agree with what we write, with what we report. And, you know, I think that antagonism, I think it is right to what Regina and Cedric are saying. It gives kind of almost emboldens authoritarian governments that actually do not believe in freedom of the press. When you see the leader of the United States denigrating, you know, his own media. And so, you know, hopefully, you know, there will be less antagonism between, certainly, you know, as the media, you're never going to be friends with the government. You know, your job is to hold them to account. But you want some sense of mutual respect. And that would be our hope for the next administration, whatever the next administration is, that there is a mutual respect, and that in doing so gives less cover, gives less, you know, does not embolden authoritarian regimes as much to go after the press. Because if the United States is not holding up power or the freedom of the press as a right, as something to be respected, then why should other governments? And I think ultimately, you know, hopefully, you know, depending on when there's a new administration, whether it's in 4 years or in 6 months. Whatever that is, our hope would be that kind of message spreads to the world.
Great, thanks for that. I want to encourage our audience to send in your questions and comments. You can do that just by typing in questions in your Facebook comments or YouTube comments box, and we'll make sure that we get some of these good ones to the panelists. There have been a lot of questions about self-censorship. I think we've discussed that, but still, people are very interested in, for example, how Rachel Yeo asks, how should journalists stay motivated while fighting self-censorship within their own news organizations? Ging, since you mentioned, the problems of self-censorship now, that it's obviously something that reporters and editors are very sensitive about, in the face of what ABS-CBN is facing. I wonder if you can take that question. What would you recommend? How do journalists stay motivated and try to work within their organizations to get that story and not self-censor?
Yes. I just tell our people to keep their eyes on the prize, so to speak. It is hard. It is very challenging to work under a cloud of fear or apprehension about safety, about job security, about your future. But what I tell journalists is this: we are living in the worst of times these days. These are dark days. But these are opportunities for all of us to rise to this challenge. We have to tell the stories. We have to continue looking for stories. We have to continue exposing wrongdoing. We have to continue our investigation. If not for ourselves, then for the public that still look up to us. It is understandable that some journalists or aspiring ones are discouraged because of the prevalence of negativity on social media, for example. But in our experience, and I am very glad to realize that we still have many young people who want to be journalists in the future. We have our citizens journalism arm in our newsroom, in our organization. These are volunteers, and to this day we can rely on them to contribute content to us, to give us video, without pay, on a voluntary basis. And these are young people who still believe that there is a need for journalism and there is a need for free media in our country.
Thank you, Ging. Ronson, I wonder for you, in terms of being here in Hong Kong. I mean, you've obviously talked about how you aren't self-censoring there at the stand. Yet I imagine that there are probably reporters who are very concerned about their futures here, and I'm wondering how are you guys staying motivated? How are you processing this? How are you still being able to show up to your work every day and chase these stories while trying to process personally a lot of this stuff that's happening?
Well, I've been in the Hong Kong journalist industry, journalism industry around 16 years. Of course, fortunately, I'm working in Stand News now. But before that, I've been spent around 14 years in other news paper or TV channels, which are the Rachel Ray said it was controlled by the merchants or tycoons who have many business relationship with China, and where there were highly censorship appeared. I would like to say that if we go to the news scenes we have watched many facts have been happened. We have watched the police using baton to beat the people. We have seen that some innocents are have been convicted and been charged by the court. We have seen many real stories. So if you see the people in front of your eyes and in front of you, that you may have a passion and a mission to tell the story about them to the Hong Kong people or to the world. News are not just contained in the newsroom or in the newspaper. If we go to if we see that everyone's story are real, that we will have a mission and we have a passion to express and bring the story out to the audience and the public. So, but of course, Rachel said it's right. It is not easy to keep on. It is not easy to keep on. But I'm just saying this. Being a journalist in Hong Kong, sometimes you may think it is like a missionary.
We're on a mission here.
Yes.
I know that we've talked some bit about the lengths that you go to protect your sources and to protect yourself as well. Selena Chang has a good question. She is asking it of Adrian in terms of, are there any precautions the New York Times will be taking, with this new situation in Hong Kong, such as prepping local Hong Kong news assistants, freelancers, and reporters in case they get summoned to drink tea by national security officers, similar to what happens in the mainland. Adrian?
Yeah, we've spent a fair amount of time with not just our local staff, but our foreign staff as well, and kind of everyone to take this kind of seriously. We've had meetings with lawyers to kind of help them better understand the law. We don't know where the red lines are yet. The lawyers don't know where the red lines are yet. Everybody is sort of learning this together. We have meetings with our information security, our technology team, to learn the best practices, the best digital practices for protecting. These are a lot of practices that we use, frankly, in a lot of places now, in terms of our technology. It's things that we use in the United States. It's things that we use on the mainland. We're being a lot more systematic about it, a lot more rigorous about it, and making sure everybody has the opportunity to learn these things. And not just those who previously might have been working on investigative, but pretty much, we're operating with the idea that anything we could do now could be sensitive. Because we just don't know exactly how the national security law is going to be applied to the media and how it's going to affect us. So our best approach is to make sure everybody is prepared and everybody understands. And as we learn new things, as we see new things, whether it's about visas, whether it's about the Apple Daily Raid, whether it's about, I think Ronson mentioned, the Nikkei getting scrutiny over an ad that it placed. We're kind of taking every piece of information and making sure everybody knows about it and is prepared, so that as this law develops, as we see it deployed, we can be best prepared. But again, this is not new for us. It's new here for us, but it is not new for media in general. This is a lot of ways in which we operate in any number of difficult scenarios, and making sure our safety and security of our team is foremost.
Thanks for that. We've probably only got time for maybe one last question, and I did want to ask. For us to take kind of a long view on this, as Ging had mentioned, ABS-CBN was shut down during martial law, and was shut down actually for quite a number of years, for more than a decade, before they finally got back. And I'm wondering, do you think that what we're seeing here now in terms of the decline of press freedom, is this a decisive decline that's going to be hard to turn back, or are there things still that can help and can still change, and improve the environment for media? Ging, you want to start?
I can throw out a few ideas. First of all, I think mainstream media, we should learn to deal with this social media problem. We really should find a way to improve our craft and I don't know, probably down the road, lessen our dependence on social media, or at the very least, try to make it work for us and try to make them accountable too, especially with the hate speech and the negativity and all of these falsehoods that they do help propagate. And also, I think we in media have to admit to our imperfections and find ways to improve on our craft. You know, we started doing this in ABS-CBN a couple of years ago, and I believe that there is always room for improvement. There is always a better way to professionalize our ranks. That is something that that we would need to do. And of course, we would need to stand up to bullies. We need to make sure that even if our backs are against the wall, we will do something to break those walls, or we will do something to push back, because we cannot and we should not allow, the powers that be to control media.
Great, thank you, Ging. Ronson?
The question back. Sorry,
I
forgot.
was asking if you think this is a decisive decline in press freedom that can't be taken back, or do you think there is still optimism for Hong Kong?
Since I'm lived in Hong Kong for around 40 years, this is my home. I cannot have. I should have keep my optimistic mind to Hong Kong, but we have to admit that the situation is very, very not good. I would like to say that the future and the only way that we can keep our optimistic manner are the new journalists. You know that we have many colleges and universities have the journalist curriculum, and around hundreds of the graduates from every years, and they are entering the industry. For me, and I told my colleagues also, the only way that in other Beijing controlled media, that young journalists is the only I would say weapons or ways to keep on our freedom of press, because they have passions and they understood that why they stay in here, and they understood and they know that they will fight every article or even a word to their editors or boss. So the only way that we have to we can have I would like to say to follow or to obey is the young journalists.
That's a really good point, and of course, I think we're all heartened by the number of student journalists who've been here with us at NTRCon through this weekend, and on very engaged in this conversation as well. We've only got a few minutes, but I do want to give Cedric and Adrian last words as well. Cedric?
Well, yes, we are Reporters Without Borders is an NGO defending press freedom, so we have to stay positive, and I would like to finish on a positive note. For sure, journalists are not going to win the battle alone. They work for the public. They need the public's assistance for their work to keep alive. So it's very important that the media would work on restoring the trust and the support from the public, because what do strongmen? They exploit the somehow lack of support from the public on the media. There is in Asia a trend of new media funded by readers, very often non-profit. I will only quote a few: Hong Kong Free Press, Citizen News, 10 News, of course, Initium, Rappler. These are media that somehow are paying a special attention on journalistic ethics. They are paying a special attention on independence. So thanks to these media, we somehow have part of the solution. Even in the US, after the election of Donald Trump, we have seen an increased audience for the media that do independent journalism. So there is a hope, but the media absolutely have to find and develop their public, not just work for themselves.
Great, thank you. Adrienne, last word?
I mean, I think there is a lot of hope when you, as everyone has said, when you look at the organizations, whether it's ABN or Rappler. I mean, even in mainland China, where there is strict censorship and mainly state media, controlled media, you know, when you watch the early months or weeks of the virus coverage, you had state media, you had Caixin, you had these amazing, amazing journalists who operate in these incredibly difficult, you know, situations, who have long been censored, you know, putting out some of the most tremendous work and really bringing to light what was happening in Wuhan, the number of people that were on the ground, you know, local journalists. I mean, that to me is the great hope. As everyone has sort of noted, journalism is really a calling, and particularly when you're operating in places where there are tight restrictions, where there is no press freedom, to see what they're doing, to see how they are exposing the Wuhan government and the failings in the coronavirus is just incredibly heartening to see, and the amazing power of journalism, even in a place that is so tightly controlled and restricted.
That's great, thanks. Yeah, I think, I mean, as you guys have all said, there's still a lot for us to be optimistic and hopeful about. We're going to have to wrap it up here. I want to thank the panelists for an engaging conversation on press freedom. Obviously, you know, it's a concern not just for us who work in the media, but for the millions who depend on credible news, and, you know, why that's so important in this time of crisis for the world. So thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Cedric, Ging, and Ronson. We've had such an incredible line of discussions and workshops the past 3 days, and we've got another day of workshops tomorrow on hostile environment reporting and how journalists can protect themselves online. If you've pondered new ideas this weekend, if you've learned new skills or made a connection with a colleague here, then N3Con 2020 has been a huge success for us. N3Con wouldn't be possible without our dedicated team of volunteers, and I really want to thank each and every one of them for contributing countless hours, sacrificing weekends and evenings to make this happen for us. We hope you continue to engage with your fellow attendees, and we hope that you consider joining our passionate and diverse community of journalists that's become family for so many of us. After N3Con, we will resume what we call our digital N3 salons. We're going to be bringing you more discussions on important media topics like this one, and workshops to elevate all of our skills. Together, we rise, and we welcome you to join us here at AAJA-Asia. For now, I hope you'll join us in about 30 minutes or so for AAJA-Asia's karaoke night. You can find the web link for that in our Facebook group and on Yap. Tonight's karaoke fest will be hosted by journalism veteran Lorraine Hahn and comedian Vivek Mabubani. See you there.